Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2024, week 21, May 20th to May 26th, and we are on our absolute favorite topic as of late, brakes. The thing I just cannot get going. But here we are persevering on, we are not giving up. So at this point in time, off camera, I did something I should have done a long time ago, and that is I called up Bear Brakes. They're the guys I got the calipers, the rotors, and the master from. I paid them a lot of money, and so I called them up for help. I said, hey, listen, this is what's going on. I've got your Bear 4-piston rears, your Bear 6-piston fronts. I've got your remaster up front. It's I think it's a 15/16 spore, power brakes, and this is what's happening. I have bled the system, and I've bled it some more. There is no air coming out of the lines. There's no air getting into the lines. There's no leaks. But what happens is when the car is off, I hit the brakes, I get a good solid pedal. As soon as I turn the car on, the brakes kind of work for a second, and then the brakes just go down to the floor. Now, when I hold the brake to the floor with the engine running, like the car stops, I was able to stop it on a hill, but the pedal does just sink right to the floor. And the guy on the phone said, well, it sounds like you got a problem with your booster. I said, really? Because my understanding of the booster, if it's broken, it'll be a hard pedal. It won't just sink down to the floor. He goes, no, I think you got an issue with your booster. And I said, well, it's a brand new one. And he goes, I don't know what else to tell you. It sounds like an issue with your booster. And I went, okay. Sounds like a bit of a cop-out just saying, it's the one thing that's not Bear. But, what do I know? I've been beating my head against this for like the better part of 3 weeks now, maybe even more. Well, actually more, because I've bled it periodically throughout the time. And anyways, so I'm like, okay, well, I've got this old booster here. It came off of the car. It's probably original to 85. I can't switch the master out for the old master, because that's what I was also going to do, is switch out the master to the old one. But the master that was original to the car, the ports are different than what's on the Bear, so I don't have any adapters for that. So okay, let's switch out the booster. It's going to be a bit of a pain in the ass, because I got to undo all the 4 bolts off the booster, which I just recently did. But yeah, let's do this again. Let's undo all the bolts on the master, or on the booster, sorry. So first I undid the 2 bolts on the master, kind of pulled it forward off the booster, and now I'm under the dash undoing the 4 nuts that hold the booster to the car. So that's what we're going to do. Pull this booster out, swap it out for the original one to the car, connect it all kind of back up, and see what we see. So with all the bolts out, it's kind of fun getting this out of there, mainly because, I've got the line for the clutch reservoir there. The actual clutch master is in the way as well, so I got to undo the bottom bolt and do the top nut and kind of get that loose, and then I can work the booster out and get it out of the car. All right, out with the new, in with the old, I guess. let's try it. I've got nothing else to lose at this point. I really don't think it's the booster, only because the booster gets vacuum when the engine is running, and then just helps push the rod. I don't understand how the booster would collapse the pedal and like bottom out the master while it's running, but whatever. Let's do it. So for this initial test, I think I'm only throwing like 2 bolts on the back of the booster. Throw the hose on it. I think I only, throw 1 bolt on the master because I just want to, before I get too carried away, I just want to test this. So with the 1 bolt tightened, with a couple bolts on the booster, we can fire up the car and see if there's any improvement at all. So fire up the car, and the problem is with only 1 bolt on the master, it's actually kind of just pushing and skewing, and it's really, really not good. So I do have to throw that 2nd bolt on there to really test this. Alright, with that 2nd bolt on, let's jump back in the car, fire it up, hit the brakes, and I'm like, hey, this is kind of neat and nice. Let's just jump in the car and see if I actually have brakes, and hot damn! My brake pedal feels really good. So I'm just looking at it, I'm like, really? The old booster works? And yeah, sure shit it does. So we can start, putting the clutch back together, putting the booster all, like tightening it all up, making it all work. Because yeah, it looks like it's gonna work. It's gonna do what we need it to do. Like I'm just so baffled and upset with myself because I didn't call Bear earlier. But hey, I am ecstatic that I have brakes. The booster's good. The brake pedal feels great. We can continue on with other stuff to get this car on the road. with everything tightened up back under the dash, I'm just kind of getting a bit of a height adjustment on the shocks, just making it the same on both sides. Not really doing anything too scientific here because I really don't know where the suspension should be at this point. So, moving on to a little bit of suspension work. So in previous videos, we saw how low the car was, how low the exhaust was to the ground. And the reality is, it's very low. So what I'm doing here is I'm adjusting the rear end, just kind of bringing it up a little bit. So to do that, I'm moving the brackets up in the holes because I want to get the car, or like the body, a bit higher. But now that I think about this, I really don't think that's gonna do much for the exhaust height except in the rear, which actually might make this a bit worse. And the reason for that is the exhaust is connected directly to the engine, and the engine is connected directly to the frame. So the only way this is gonna be, the only way I can make a big difference is if I actually raise the front up. I need to raise the body in the front up with the front suspension, which would actually raise the entire, essentially raise the engine up and give me a bit more clearance. But getting the height in the back up a little bit isn't gonna hurt any. Doesn't look quite as nice with the wheels not tucked in, but I can always readjust that later. And I might do that. I might sit the back end down a little bit more. But for right now, I just want to get this on the road, get it tested out, and, you know, drive it around a little bit. And I think this is going to help me do that. With all the suspension and the brake work, we can throw the tires back on the car. drop this back down and we can take a look at just how low the car is. Like, this is only like 2 inches off the ground. It is stupid low. I actually kind of hate it. But hey, we are back on the ground, so we can fire up the car and we can test the clutch and the brakes and see if everything works as it should. And the clutch is really not great. Like, when I push it in, it's really hard to get in gear. It feels like the clutch is not disengaged, so I'm just trying to, the car will roll back and forth. If you're not on the brakes hard and you can put it in gear, it'll just kind of roll and then pop in. But that's really bad on the transmission. It's bad on the synchros. It's bad on the forks. It's not a good situation to be in. So we're going to have to figure something out for that. But the brakes work, and that is the main thing. The brakes work. But as I said, the clutch isn't working, so I'm just kind of checking the clutch engagement right now. So I'm just pulling the master off, and I'm going to do a little bit of measuring. Alright, it is time to open this big old box that we got from LMR and see what's in it. We actually got a couple of different packages, but we're just going to quickly check this out because I'm pretty excited and need this. It is a new power steering rack. So the old rack was leaking, so that old rack was stupidly old. It kind of leaked ever since I got the car, but I never really dealt with it. But in order to get this on the road now, we need a new rack. So grabbed that rack from LMR. It's a quick ratio rack. Grabbed a bunch of other small things as well, but the rack was the most important thing. I grabbed new lines because figured why not? I'm already in there. I might as well just grab new power steering lines, and that way it's all brand new. It shouldn't leak, etc., etc. So another thing that I got is that I'm unpackaging right now. It is a new shifter handle. So I got this from Fiddle Fart Fabrication, and I am hoping this is going to go in, and it's going to be a very, very nice piece. It's beautifully crafted. It is phenomenal. I'm pretty excited about this. But silly me, I should have known better. Ran into the same issue that I ran into with the original silver shifter that I got, and that the holes don't line up. So this is another shifter for a T5. when I ordered it, it didn't really say, but I should have known it wouldn't have been for a T56, because everything that Fiddle Fart does is all for a foxbody, which it would have come with a T5 standard. So that's all right. I've got a buddy who's got a T5 in his car. I'll give him that nice piece, and no big deal. I reached out to Fiddle Fart and I said, hey, if you guys ever do a T56 shifter, I will buy your first one, because it's such a quality piece. It is really, really nice, and yeah, I would like to have one from them. All right, after that quick little detour, we are going to install the rack. So, I mean, you've already seen me install the rack on this car, but, you know, for the most part, we're going to jack the car up, take the front wheels back off, undo the, oh, what the hell is that? That is a bump steer kit from the spindles. So that way I can drop the tie rods, or the outer tie rods, off from the spindle. I guess it's the bump steer kit. I don't have outer tie rods anymore. I technically have a bump steer kit. So pull that off, and then I can undo the bolts for the steering rack, undo all the lines, get that all out. And then what I'll do is, on the new rack, I will have to remove the stock bushings, and then I'll transfer my offset rack bushings into the new one, put it all back together, and profit. So we are taking a little intermission around doing the power steering rack. I designed some brackets for my marker lights, but I'm having issues. I've switched my plasma cutting programs around. I'm just having some issues with it actually running, so I got to get that all worked out. But yeah, so just a little intermission while I'm kind of playing with this, doing a little bit of live editing on code just to see if it's going to work. And yeah. With those live edits, we are actually properly cutting now. So that is going to be the new bracket for my marker lights, hopefully. Yeah, as we can see, the first hole lines up pretty much dead on. The second one is pretty close. Actually, it's dead on. So yeah, that's going to work perfectly for what we need. So I'm just trying to undo those nuts and take it apart. But of course, as with everything, Ford used like a double-sided stud, and of course it's stuck on one side, so got to do a little bit of dicking around to get it apart. But I just want to see what this is going to look like. Did a little bit of reworking off camera, and now I am just rerunning the program, setting it all up, and then cutting out a new piece. Or the second piece, I should say. Okay, awesome. Those are ready to go. Enough of a distraction. Let's get back to doing this rack work. So now that I've got the rack out, I can go and I can pull the inner tie rods off. And the reason why I need to pull the inner tie rods off of this rack is, if you remember from a long time ago when I did the front suspension, I switched to SN95 front inner tie rods because they're a different thread and they are going to work with the bump steer kit that I have. So what I need to do is pull this all apart, pull those out, and then I can start working on the new rack. Now that the old rack is kind of taken apart, I'm just going to very quickly clean up the bench because I spilt a bunch of fluid on it. Alright, so the new rack. So this is a foxbody rack. So it has foxbody inner tie rods on it. And as we just said, I need to pull those off. So we're going to pull the inners off, get it all apart, get it back on the, or get it over on the vise, pull those off. And then as I also mentioned a little bit earlier in the video, I need to swap the rack bushings out for my offset rack bushings. Now what the offset rack bushings do is allow my rack to sit a little bit lower in the car. So I get a little bit more oil pan clearance and I can kind of drop the engine down a little bit. Alright, now it's time to pull these rack bushings out. So my original plan was get a socket that is large enough, put it over the end of the bushing, and then use a clamp to start drawing it out. Unfortunately, I do not have a clamp that is deep enough to do that with the socket, so I'm like, oh, maybe it'll be loose enough with my, and I can just use these clamps, and yeah, no, absolutely not. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I got a buddy with a hydraulic press that'll, that I can press this out with. So called a buddy, they didn't have it. So, I had to figure something out because, I want to get this in the car. So yeah, I got to figure something out. Alright, so as I said, that socket was just a little bit too deep and my C-clamp was not big enough to open wide enough to get onto the rack bushing and over the socket. So I have this exhaust tubing, or this tube that I use to redo my exhaust, so I can just cut that a tiny bit shorter than the socket, make it so that it fits in the C-clamp, put it over the bushing, and then use the C-clamp to push it out. And yeah, this is a great idea. I do run into an issue where the C-clamp just starts kind of pushing right on the center bushing and kind of pushing the bushing out more than the metal center bushing. Starts pushing that out more than the entire bushing. So I'm just going to end up putting a bolt in there. But the other problem is the back of that little piece of tubing is collapsing under the force needed to pull the bushing out. So you'll see in a second here, I'm just going to weld another chunk of metal on the back side of that tube, so that way the clamp has something to spread the force out a little bit more evenly on, and then using a bolt and some washers, I can draw the bushing out. So while I'm getting ready to weld this piece of metal to this tube, this is actually a great time for a PSA. Earlier I mentioned I was cleaning my bench, cleaning the fluid off it, and you'll see that I used a brake cleaner to clean off the bench. Now, using brake cleaner with welding is very, very bad if the brake cleaner is chlorinated. Now, if the brake cleaner is chlorinated and you clean a part and then weld, that potentially creates a deadly gas, or best case scenario, a gas that's going to damage your lungs severely. So after I did this bit of welding, I was like, wait a second, I just used brake cleaner. Is this chlorinated? And yes, it was. Now, fortunately, between the time that I used the brake cleaner on the bench and I did all the welding, any of the residual brake cleaner would have dissipated, and there was no pooling. But it is something that you absolutely must be careful of if you are welding and using brake cleaner in any capacity. Whenever I'm doing welding and cleaning parts, I just use acetone, and I usually just clean the bench off with, a degreaser or my WD-40. But in this case, I just grabbed the brake cleaner because it was there. And so, yeah, just take care when you're using brake cleaner in your shop, especially if you're welding, because it could be deadly and you could die from it, and welders have. On to a happier note, we are back onto putting the inner tie rods on the new rack and getting that all ready. So this is where I get to use my new made tool. So just kind of cup it around the bushing on the back. I got a bolt in the front, and then just use the clamp against the bolt to push the bushing through and catch it in the cup. Kind of easy peasy. Yeah, so it actually came out way easier than I expected. Yeah, so with it out, I can throw the new ones in. All right, with the SN95 tie rods on, with the bushings in, we're going to throw the lines on the bench because it's going to be easier to get at it to tighten them with it on the bench than it will in the car. So let's just rip those on. With the rack in the car, we'll tighten up the bolts. When I pulled this apart, the fender washers that I used were actually super bent. So I was like, okay, I'll just use, a regular washer and get it to torque. But the reality is I do not need to crank it as tight. It just needs to be tight so it doesn't move back and forth. So I don't actually go fully up to torque. I just go until it's tight and the washer, doesn't want to keep straight before it deforms. But that is more than sufficient. It's a lock nut. It's not going anywhere. As long as the rack doesn't move, that's the main goal here. All right, with that tight enough, we will route the lines up, get them connected, and then we will reinstall the bump steer kit on the spindles. Trying to torque it just laying on my back, but it gets a lot of torque and a lot more torque than I can really generate from this position. So we will readjust, come up top, and we will start retorquing it. As you can see, as I'm torquing this, I forget what I torqued this up to. It ends up being like 150 foot-pounds or something like that. But, trying to get myself positioned so that I'm not moving, I ended up having to put my foot on the control arm, but whatever, we got it there. That's all that matters. All right, with that all done, we are going to go up to the steering wheel, put a little piece of tape on the steering wheel, kind of get the steering rack, count the number of turns total, turn the steering wheel halfway, and then we will adjust the wheel to be in the center, because that should be, halfway. That's where we want the wheel to be pointing straight up and down. And then from there, I'll just give the toe in and out just a ballpark eye, and get it somewhere in the hopefully vicinity. Obviously it's not going to be dead on, but hopefully it's not, way out. All right, do a little bit of adjustment on the suspension here. To be fair, I really don't know what I'm doing. And this right now is probably hurting me more than helping, but I'm doing it anyways because I was just not entirely sure what I was doing. All right, so with those done, as I mentioned before, not having good luck with the clutch. Again, I don't think it's fully engaging, so maybe there's some air in the system, so I am going to bleed the system more. So yeah, you can see fluids coming out. It looks like there's a tiny little bit of air coming out, but that's why I'm using this bottle again, because it should only allow air to go one way. Kind of the same thing that I was doing with the brakes before. And then, yeah, we'll see how this goes. So with the clutch, after you've done gravity feed bleeding it, they want you to use this stopper and this syringe. You put the brake fluid in there, and then you open the bleeder, and then you force the fluid through with the syringe. So I'm just getting the bottle on top of the headers up high with it connected. It's open, and then you just kind of push the fluid through. And then I get enough fluid through, and then it starts overfilling the reservoir. And so I stop, and then I go close the bleeder real quick. So at this point, with the wheels off the ground, there's not a whole lot I can do, but, test the clutch and it, feels good, I guess. So hopefully that'll fix the problem with the clutch. But now it's time to get back onto these marker lights. So do a little bit of cleanup here. And then what I'm going to do is I need those nuts off of those like double-sided studs. So grab tools, get that off, get that all apart, and then put the studs back in the marker lights. And then we can start working on mounting the marker lights in the car. But of course I dropped that bottle of brake fluid all over the floor. And now I have to clean it up because I was too lazy to put the lid on like an idiot. So after test fitting these, they're pretty tight, and there's a lot of dross from the plasma cutting still, so I'm just going to take them over to the bench, open the holes up a tiny little bit, and just generally give them a good cleanup here. And we're going to clean off these nuts because they were kind of rusty, and as you saw, they were kind of stuck before. So let's clean them up. And before I put them on, I'm going to put a little anti-seize on the threads so that hopefully if I ever have to take these off later, that comes off a lot easier than it did this time. now onto the car. So before I put those marker lights in, the front end's not sitting entirely flush. The front of the fenders are a little bent from when I pulled it off initially, I think. So I'm going to pull the front end off, and then I'm going to beat on the fenders a little bit, get them a little bit straightened out so that front end sits up a little bit tighter. And right now, I'm just looking for all the hardware from when I took the front end apart, but I don't think I saved it anywhere. So fortunately, I do have some new hardware that I bought specifically for the fenders and the front end. So let's get that stuff out and we can use that. So as you've seen throughout these videos, I was pretty cavalier with the front end. I just kind of threw it on the floor and moved it around, and because of that I bent these brackets and I bent the studs coming out of them. And so in trying to straighten them, I actually just I break one of them off here as I'm trying to straighten it out as best I can without breaking it, but yep, it comes apart. So I'm gonna have to take this over and weld it back in place. And eventually what I will do is I will take a measurement of this bracket and I will build myself a new one. I'll plasma cut it out and I'll just build a new one as a replacement. But until that time, this one, we can hack it together and make it work. So now that it's all hacked together, I was kind of beating on the threads a little bit. They were in the vise, so I'm just going to take my die and I'm just going to clean up the threads, do it on both of the studs, and then I will also clean up all of the leftover studs that are on the front end on the other side. Just, you know, might as well, doesn't hurt to run the die down it. And with that, we can now put the front end on, kind of get it all lined up with the fenders, put some nuts on, and that will allow us to mount those marker lights. Alrighty, yeah, with the front end on there, what we can do is we can go ahead, grab this marker light, crawl underneath, and just kind of see how much room we got to play with in behind the bumper cover. And as it turns out, it's just going to be a straight shot right over to the front end for this to get mounted, so give you a bit of a better angle. But yeah, so with that marker light up, I can just weld a piece right onto the back of this. It'll go straight over to the front crash bar, and away we go. It's going to be pretty simple, so I'm going to go off camera, just design a real quick little piece on the computer to plasma cut out that's got the same radius as the front bar there. And then once we come back, after we'll cut that out, we'll get that mark mounted up. We'll just hold it up in place. We'll weld the new bracket to the back of the marker light, and then we can weld it onto the bar just to tag it, and then do the same thing on the other side. And then once that's done, we will switch over to the TIG welder, and we will take it all in and make it solid so it doesn't go anywhere. right, with all that welded up, we put some lights in there and we can test the lights and check them out. So clearance lights work, left turn signal, good to go. Right turn signal, good to go. Hazards, hell yeah, they work. So we're happy with this. I mean, this is doing everything that it needs to do. This is perfect. So now that that works, we can throw the front end back on. We're going to put a little bit of never sees on all of the studs because, well, we ran into issues getting the originals off. So let's make this a little bit easier on our future self when we need to take it off again. All right, now that the front end's on, one of the next things we need to do is this is the lower rad support. So we're just going to throw it up in the car and kind of get it in place. And as I'm putting this up, it's not fitting like it's supposed to. It's really tight against the frame rails. As well, it's not sitting up against the rad all that nice. And I remembered at one point in time, I actually adjusted the angle of the radiator because of the cooling fans and the Pro Charger and the belts and stuff. So obviously I adjusted the angle of the radiator without this bar in. So now this bar is not going to fit anymore. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to take it over to the bench and I'll need to modify it so that, you know, it can kind of sit right up against the radiator to support it. So we'll get the bar thrown up in the vise here, and the modifications we're going to do is we're just going to remove those tabs off the end of it so that it's just a straight flat bar, and that will be sufficient for what we need to do for now. And then what I can do is later I can go in and I can redo this bar, re-angle those, and make it a little bit nicer. Alrighty, so just kind of tightening up some of the suspension before we put the wheels back on. Alright, now that we have marker lights, it is time to turn our attention to the headlights. So these are stock, original, I don't know when they were last replaced, but they are pretty trash. They don't light up all that well, and so I bought replacements for these. So the replacements that I bought are from RMS Lighting. Super nice pieces. They're LED bulbs. They're hopefully going to be super duper bright. They come packaged and ready to go into any foxbody. So you can just plug your existing wiring harness right into this kit and it'll work. But of course, I've done all custom wiring for everything, so I don't need their wiring. I'm just going to wire directly into the bulbs. So this is a two-piece unit now, where the original one was a single piece sealed. There is a H4 LED bulb that goes into this housing. So the way it works is you put the bulb into the housing, you plug the bulb in, and then it works, in theory. Now, throughout this process, I got to take a little bit of time just to make sure I got it all wired right. And so, yeah, so I'm going to put the bulbs in, plug them in, and then I'm just going to, check the high beam switch, make sure it's all working and doing what it needs to do. Alright, so first look, we're going to pull the headlight switch out. Low beam seems to work. High beam seems to work with the low beam. That is doing exactly what we need it to do. And as you can kind of see, it's pretty bright. And it's just as bright in person. So I kind of wanted to do a comparison, plug the old lights in and see how they look compared to the new ones. And you'll see in a second here that the new lights are way brighter than the old ones ever were. Now, mind you, those are super duper old, and they've been sitting around, so there's probably a bunch of crap on them. But yeah, the new ones are much nicer. So we're gonna swap the old ones out for new ones on the passenger side. All right, folks, now that we've got the headlights all swapped out, that is all the time that we have for this one. So as always, if you stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.